At the party to celebrate my son-in-law's promotion, his father blurted out, "You can't sit with us," and his mother threw a maid's uniform at me, saying, "Put this on and serve." Everyone at the table burst out laughing. I turned to look at my daughter, only to see her bow her head without saying a single word. I stood up and said 6 words that froze the laughter. The next morning, no one imagined that the secrets they thought were buried forever would start rising to the surface. I arrived at the Sterling estate at 7 o'clock sharp for Brandon's promotion party. I was wearing my red velvet dress, the most decent one that Brenda, a 62-year-old widow like me, had kept with care. "Good evening, ma'am," interrupted the voice of Eric, a young staff member. He glanced at me with a bit of pity for my outdated clothes and quickly pointed toward the main hall, as if wanting me to disappear. I smiled and nodded to keep my cool. Today I wasn't coming to applaud Brandon's success. I was coming for Chrissy, only for my daughter. The party had already started. More than 20 people in magazine cover suits were laughing and chatting as if the outside world didn't exist. Chrissy appeared in a bright red silk dress, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Seeing me, she rushed over with a nervous look. "Mom, you're here," she whispered, as if afraid of being heard. Before I could answer, Brandon arrived, imposing in his shiny black suit. "Chrissy, honey, my partners are waiting for you," he said with a voice that was sweet but firm. He took her away, leaving me standing there alone in the middle of the enormous hall. I managed to spot Christopher Sterling Sr., Chrissy's father-in-law, and next to him, Eleanor Sterling, with a glass of red wine in her hand. They were surrounded by people, and his voice boomed as he bragged about a recent business deal. He saw me out of the corner of his eye, his mouth twisted into a half-smile, and he turned away, continuing his story as if I were invisible. A staff member led me to a chair at the back of the patio, hidden behind some bushes. I sat down, keeping my back straight, watching Chrissy in silence. She was pouring wine for Brandon, then serving food to Eleanor. Although there were 5 servers nearby, not once did she look at me, and I saw how her shoulders trembled every time her mother-in-law said something to her. A knot formed in my chest. They started bringing out the courses. Brandon stood up to give a speech. He raised his wine glass, and the light from the chandelier illuminated his face as if he were a prince. "I want to thank my parents, who have always backed me," he said with a deep, confident voice. "Thanks to my partners for trusting me. And finally, thanks to Chrissy, my wife, who has always been in the background, taking care of the family." Some applauded, but no one turned to look at her. My Chrissy, the daughter who as a child dreamed of being a painter, was now only mentioned as a woman in the background. The atmosphere remained lively until Christopher stood up suddenly. He raised his glass and looked directly at me. The entire table fell silent, as if everyone knew something was about to happen. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't lower my gaze. I held his eyes, trying not to tremble. He cleared his throat and spoke with a tone of contempt. "Before we continue, I have something to clarify." The room went quiet. He pointed directly at me, his voice sounding like he was dictating a sentence. "Mrs. Miller, you cannot sit with us. Everyone here has status. You are nothing more than a nobody." The silence was so thick, it hurt. Then I heard the giggle of Nancy Carter, sharp as a razor. Next to her, a coworker of Brandon's covered his mouth to hold back laughter, but his shoulders were shaking. Then one, then another. The entire room, more than 20 people, could barely contain their guffaws. I turned to look at Chrissy, hoping she would do something, that she would raise her voice. But she only had her gaze locked on the table, shoulders hunched and hands clenched. My grandson Ethan, sitting next to her, looked at me with those big, confused eyes. He is only 7 years old, but he understood that something very ugly was happening. It was then that Eleanor stood up, her face expressionless. She signaled a staff member to bring a gray service uniform. She grabbed it and threw it at my feet. "This fits you better. Put it on and serve," she said with that soft voice that cut like a sharpened blade. "Put it on and serve." The laughter cracked like thunder. Richard, Christopher's buddy, slammed the table in approval. "Know your place," he shouted, provoking more laughter. A young female employee even raised her cell phone to record. I stood up slowly, my hands steady, although inside I was harboring a hurricane. I looked directly at Christopher and Eleanor, the two who took it upon themselves to turn me into everyone's joke. I took a breath and released 6 exact words. Without shouting, but so cold they froze the laughter. They died down immediately. It was only 6 words, but they sounded like an explosion, bursting their bubble of arrogance. I turned around and walked out of the hall. I heard Chrissy say softly, "Mom," but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. If I did, I would break, and I wasn't going to allow myself that. That night, far from that house, I sat on a wooden bench at the bus stop, hugging myself to stop shaking. They thought I was an old doll they could mock without consequences. But they didn't know that the very next day, everything was going to start changing. The secrets they thought were well buried were going to come out, thanks to that nobody they humiliated. What happened today didn't surprise me. It was just the last straw after years of enduring slights in silence. On that old bus back to my apartment, the memories of so many moments where they belittled me came back one by one like daggers. 15 years ago, Chrissy and I lived quietly, making ends meet in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood in the city. I remember how she would sit to do her homework, her little eyes shining while she talked about wanting to be a painter. The day she turned 16, I killed myself working overtime for 6 months just to give her a decent party. I made the strawberries and cream cake myself, hired a modest local band, and invited her friends. Seeing her happy in her blue dress filled my soul. I believed that love was enough to give her the world. One day she arrived with Brandon to introduce him to me, and I was surprised by how well-groomed he was. A well-fitted gray suit, a confident smile, and a basket of imported fruits so expensive that not even combining my entire month's salary would be enough to buy it. "Ma'am, I love Chrissy, and I swear I'm going to take care of her all her life." I looked him straight in the eyes. I saw sincerity, and I believed him. But inside me, something stirred, like a strange premonition, a discomfort I didn't know how to explain. The first day I met the Sterlings, I tried to appear calm. I put on my most decent dress and brought a jar of orange marmalade made by me. But as soon as I set foot in that mansion, I knew I didn't fit in that world. Christopher asked me, "And what do you do for a living, Mrs. Miller?" It sounded polite, but his eyes were cold, as if he were appraising an object. I answered that I worked in a tailoring shop, although now only part-time because I took care of my family. Eleanor looked at my rough hands and smiled slightly with a tone of charity. How admirable! All night they bombarded me with questions about my family and business, and with every answer of mine, the distance grew larger. When Christopher wanted to know if any one of my people had a large company, I shook my head and still tried to smile. My people were purely hard-working folks. On Chrissy's wedding day, I thought everything would be different. It was in a huge church. I sat in the first row in the family section, but I felt invisible. "No," Sterling spoke a word to me, not a look, not a greeting. Chrissy looked beautiful in her white dress, but seeing me, she only smiled uncomfortably. "Mom? Sorry, I'm rushing," she told me when I tried to hug her, and right then Brandon took her away for photos with his partners. I was left standing there, surrounded by strangers, feeling out of place. After the wedding, Chrissy started visiting me less and calling me little. At first, she still made excuses. "Mom, I'm swamped. Brandon's family organizes gatherings all the time," but over time, she only sent short text messages, just calling to say I'm fine. I wanted to convince myself she was adapting to her new life. Once, I prepared pot roast, her favorite dish. I called her with excitement. "Come over to eat. It's ready." Chrissy laughed on the phone. "I'll be right there." I set the table, even bought her favorite soda. But an hour later, she called back, lowering her voice. "Mom, forgive me. Brandon's mom invited me to go shopping. I couldn't say no." I noticed her nervousness, but I just told her, "Don't worry, honey." When I hung up, I stayed staring at how the pot roast got cold, with a knot in my chest. When I found out she was expecting Ethan, I cried with emotion. I knitted some little wool socks for him, every stitch with a prayer. When I took them to the Sterling house, I gave them to her timidly. I made them for Ethan. Eleanor took them, inspected them, and barely smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller, but we already bought enough brand-name clothes. Wool isn't good for the baby's skin." She put them in a closet, and I knew that door would not open again. "It's okay, I understand," I murmured, turning around before my tears escaped. Every time I went to see Ethan, they treated me like I was a foreigner. Christopher would only nod with a feigned seriousness, calling me Mrs. before turning his back on me. Brandon bossed Chrissy around without shame in front of me. Stay on top of Ethan. Bring water for Dad. I couldn't hold back. Let me do it. Let Chrissy rest a bit. He gave me a frozen smile. No need, Mom. I turned to see my daughter, but she just lowered her gaze. Mom, don't worry. That night I felt guilty. Mom, today I made a mistake allowing my daughter to get into that family. I calmed myself down. Just have patience. Sooner or later they will understand. I trusted those fake smiles. I turned a blind eye to the signs, not appearing in their photos, the cheap gifts disguised as thoughtful details. I believed that if I gave love, things would improve, and I clung to that idea. But my silence only fed their contempt. Every time I stepped aside, every time I bowed my head, they trampled me more. I lied to myself, believing my affection would make them change. Until that night of the party, when all hope broke. If your mother-in-law or in-laws have ever humiliated you in a way you can't forget, tell us in the comments. Your stories can make many people feel accompanied. At dawn, the phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I answered without speaking. Mom. Brandon's voice sounded without his typical fake courtesy, loaded with contained anger. What was that about last night? You made us look ridiculous, me and the whole family, in front of everyone. I didn't answer. That silence made him desperate. Say something, he shouted. What is that stupidity about the property? It's not in Brandon's name? What are you plotting? I took a deep breath and answered with a firm voice. You should ask your father, Christopher. Maybe he knows more than I do. I hung up immediately. The dry click marked the end. My hand was shaking, but inside me, something I thought lost returned. Determination. Less than 10 minutes later, it rang again. No need to look at the number. Old woman, what are you up to? Thundered Christopher with a sharp voice. Who do you think you are to blurt that out in front of my guests in my own house? I imagined his face red with fury, his fist squeezing a whiskey glass like last night. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I only told the truth, I answered calmly. That truth you've been wanting to bury for years. He let out a biting laugh. Truth? You have nothing. You think a nobody like you can do something? You're going to regret it. He cut the line. I stayed looking out the window. The sun bathed the old buildings of the complex. His threat didn't make me tremble. On the contrary, it confirmed that I had touched a nerve. Half an hour later, an engine stopped abruptly in front of the building. A shiny black Mercedes parked in front of the entrance. Eleanor got out with her dark glasses covering half her face and her bright green silk outfit standing out among peeling walls and children playing. Without ringing the bell, she pounded on the door with force. I opened it, standing straight, looking her in the face. She took off her glasses and scanned me with contempt, as if I were trash. How much do you want? She said with a cloying voice. She opened her leather bag and shoved a wad of bills in my face. 50,000? 100? Take them and shut up. I looked her straight in the eyes without even touching the money. You think money buys everything, Eleanor? I released with a coldness that cut deep. There are things that don't have a price. Dignity, for example. She stood stunned and then let out a bitter laugh. Dignity? She repeated mockingly. You talking about that? Don't forget your daughter and your grandson are still in my house. Every word of hers was like a knife. If you don't stop, you're going to lose everything. She said that and got into the car, leaving the wad of bills in the entrance as if it were a slap in the face. I stayed watching as the Mercedes drove away, without anger, just with the certainty of something. Now they were afraid of me. At noon, the phone rang with the voice of Ben Sullivan, my old accountant, quiet but excited. I did just what you asked. The purchase of the land in Colorado by the Sterling Group has been halted. They are reviewing the documents on the other side. I heard Brandon shout, his voice full of fury. Ben lowered his voice more. Their lawyer went silent when I mentioned the Stevens archive. I smiled for the first time that day. Thanks, Ben. That name I had hidden for so long was now starting to crack the power of the Sterlings. Later that afternoon, Chrissy called crying. Mom, my father-in-law is breaking things. Brandon is screaming. They say you're destroying my family. Mom, I heard things smashing and then Brandon's shout. Crazy old woman. My soul shrank, but I answered with a calm voice. Hug Ethan tight. Trust me, she murmured. Mom, I'm scared. I squeezed the phone. I swear I won't let anyone hurt you or Ethan. After hanging up, I sat with my face in my hands, doubting if I was putting my daughter in the lion's mouth. That night, watching TV, a news flash appeared. Sterling Consortium shares dropped slightly without apparent cause. I knew it was barely the beginning. The fear of the Sterlings was no longer just a hunch. It was visible in the numbers, in their trembling silence. Today, I went for water, but my heart remained heavy. I thought about Chrissy, about Ethan, and I asked myself if it was worth unearthing the truth, if it would hurt those I loved most. 6 months ago, I was in the garden of the Sterling mansion, among little lights and music, celebrating Ethan's 7th birthday. Superhero balloons flew in the air. Children laughed around a table with a white tablecloth. I was wearing a simple blue dress, sitting in a corner trying to catch some of the joy, although inside I was burdened. Chrissy went from here to there, exhausted but happy seeing her son blow out the candles. She had spent the entire week baking a Spider-Man cake for Ethan. I felt pride and sadness at the same time, because I knew no one in that family valued what my daughter did. And then, it happened. While carrying the cake, Chrissy tripped a little, and a bit of frosting fell onto the white marble. Just that. Eleanor got up like a mad woman, her eyes popping out. "What did you do?" Her scream drowned out the music. "It's Italian marble. Do you know how hard it is to clean that?" "No," and the whole garden went mute, and all eyes pointed at my daughter. Chrissy turned red, stammering, "Sorry. It was an accident." Eleanor crossed her arms with a mocking little smile. "You didn't do it on purpose? You are always so useless." I turned toward Brandon, hoping he would come to his wife's defense, but he just crossed his arms with a stone face. "What are you doing standing there?" he snapped dryly. "Go get a rag, now." Chrissy lowered her head, shoulders hunched from nerves, and ran to the kitchen. I stood like a statue in front of almost 20 people. My daughter, the hostess of the event, ended up on her knees on the floor, her pale pink dress dragging among the tiles, cleaning a little spot of frosting with trembling hands. That image drove itself into my soul. My Chrissy, the girl of big dreams, reduced to a servant at her own son's party. Ethan ran toward her with his little eyes full of tears. "Mom, don't clean anymore." Chrissy lifted her face, forcing a smile with misty eyes. "It's okay, my love," she whispered. I wanted to lift her up, scream at everyone, but shame left me nailed down. Behind me, Mrs. Nancy Carter covered her mouth, stifling a giggle. Clearly she wasn't raised right. That giggle tore me apart inside. Something broke in me. I had endured too much. The looks over the shoulder, the poisonous phrases, Chrissy's sad silence. Staying quiet was turning my back on my daughter and grandson. I turned around and left the party without opening my mouth. Stepping onto the sidewalk with the night upon me, my chest felt heavy, but inside I already knew what I had to do. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in my small apartment looking at an old photo of the two of us. "Sorry, daughter," I murmured. "I let this get out of control." At dawn, I grabbed the little I had saved and got on a bus heading elsewhere. I arrived at the office of Attorney Cassidy Roman. She looked up and asked in a low voice, "Mrs. Miller?" I nodded and started letting it all out. Ethan's party, the years Chrissy was treated as if she were worthless, the humiliations by the Sterlings. My voice broke. "I'm not looking for revenge. I just want justice for my daughter." Attorney Cassidy listened without interrupting me, with a firm gaze but full of understanding. When I finished, she tapped the table with her fingers and looked me in the face. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "are you willing to go all the way? This road is heavy. The Sterlings have cash, they have influence, and they aren't going to let themselves be beaten just like that." I thought of Chrissy, of Ethan, of that confused little face of the boy seeing his mom on the floor. "I'm ready," I answered, with a firm voice, although the fear was still there. Attorney Cassidy smiled barely and nodded. "Perfect. Let's start where they least imagine." A week later, I took a quiet trip to an old parish in a nearby city where Sister Margaret, my childhood friend, lived. Margaret and I grew up together. We shared hopes and pains. But while I went down the path of motherhood, she gave herself to faith. I arrived at the convent one afternoon when the rain wouldn't let up. The sky was overcast and my heart heavy like those clouds. Margaret opened the door. Her simple habit didn't take away the warmth of her smile. Brenda, so long without seeing you, she said, hugging me. I know you come for something important. I nodded without beating around the bush. Margaret, I need those papers. We entered her small room with a single bed and a crucifix hanging on the wall. From under the bed, she pulled out an old wooden chest with a rusty padlock. Inside was the complete archive she had guarded for years. Contracts, trusts, business agreements, documents the Sterlings swore were lost in an accidental fire. We spent the whole afternoon reviewing everything, sheet by sheet, seal by seal. Brenda, Margaret said, squeezing my hand. Her voice was trembling. This is God's will. It's time for the truth to come to light. I looked at the papers, feeling between my chest and back a mixture of courage and fear. You're right, I said quietly. I can't play blind anymore. With the archive in my hands, I knew I ceased to be the nobody the Sterlings mocked. I had a weapon. It wasn't cash or power, it was the truth, and that terrified them. Upon leaving the convent, it was still raining, but I felt years of weight being lifted off me. My counterattack plan silently kicked off formally, and I swore not to stop until Chrissy and Ethan were free. After the party, I didn't seek out the Sterlings again, nor did I answer their calls full of fury. The phone wouldn't stop ringing in my apartment. I just watched it ring. That silence wasn't cowardice. It was my way of fighting. I wanted them to wallow in doubt, to ask themselves what I was plotting. Every time I didn't answer, I imagined Christopher's face lit up with anger, Brandon's nervous eyes, and I reassured myself I was doing well. But the fear remained inside, not for me, but for Chrissy and Ethan if I failed. I didn't go looking for a fight directly. I showed up at Attorney Cassidy Roman's office. That place smelled of old paper and strong coffee, as if time walked slowly there. I put the archive from the convent on her desk. It's time to send the first notification, I said with a firm voice, although my heart was pounding. Cassidy looked at me over her glasses. Are you sure? Once this starts, there is no return. I nodded, remembering Chrissy kneeling, cleaning the floor at Ethan's party. I don't plan to back down, I answered her. Never again. Cassidy got to work and drafted a document. It wasn't a lawsuit, but a request for information and asset transparency directed straight to the office of Attorney Elliot Malloy, the Sterlings' lawyer. The text cited an old clause of the partnership agreement, the one they believed erased in that fire. This is going to keep them up at night, Cassidy said with a discreet smile. They're going to think it's just a bluff, but they'll start suspecting each other. I looked at her, feeling relief to have her on my side. Thank you, Cassidy, I told her. I'm not alone anymore. At the same time, I asked Ben Sullivan, my ex-accountant, to send a formal request to the investment bank backing Brandon's Sunny Villas project. The review questioned the provenance of the land put up as collateral for the loan, a seemingly minor detail, but sufficient to shake his millionaire project. That same afternoon, Ben called me on the phone, his voice agitated. Mrs. Miller, the bank already answered, he blurted out. They requested more papers from the Sterling Group. They told me Brandon is spitting fire in his office. I smiled, not for pleasure, but for what that meant. Perfect, Ben, I told him. Keep pushing. Don't give them breathing room. I knew the Sterlings were already feeling the pressure, and that was barely the beginning. In a desperate attempt, Christopher contacted his buddy in urban development, Director Barrett, to hurry the construction permits. But this time things didn't go as Christopher expected. Ben told me. Mr. Barrett answered him very reservedly. There is a legal complaint regarding the land. We have to halt everything by protocol. I can't move anything. I imagined Christopher's face in that instant, red as a chili pepper and fists closed in rage. They were used to covering everything with money and leverage, but now they faced something they couldn't buy, the truth. It was then that Brandon came to see me. That afternoon they knocked on the door with heavy, desperate blows. Upon opening, I saw him standing there without his typical arrogance, his jacket somewhat wrinkled, hair messy, and a look full of nerves. Mom, he said with a forced smile, what do you need? A monthly allowance? A new car? I'll take care of you. Just withdraw those absurd demands. I looked at the same son-in-law who didn't say a word when they humiliated Chrissy, and I felt a cold fury rise in my chest. I don't want your money, Brandon, I told him slowly. I want the respect that you and yours owe my daughter. He laughed, but it was a dry, tense laugh. Respect? He repeated, and the fake smile vanished. You think some old papers give you the right to demand something? You're still a nobody." But he turned around and left. But I saw clearly the fear in his gaze, how his shoulders loosened while he went down the stairs. He could have shouted, but I was no longer a woman easy to intimidate. That night I took one more step, a riskier one. I went to visit Mr. Paul Stevens, the only living witness of the beginnings of the deal with the Sterlings. Now he was a frail old man living in a small house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by his little vegetable garden. I brought him a box of sweet pastries, the ones he loved when we worked together. "Brenda," he said with a quiet but warm voice. "How long has it been? You come for what happened, right?" I nodded and sat next to him, drinking a bit of tea. "Mr. Stevens," I told him, "I need you to remember. I need the truth." He nodded. His dull eyes lit up a little. "If I have to speak, I will speak," he whispered. "For you and for what is fair." I chose a cafe on the corner where the whole world could see us. I knew the Sterlings were following me, and their lackeys surely had already told them they saw me with Paul Stevens. That he was with me was already a warning in itself. They thought I only wanted money with my threats, but they still didn't comprehend the size of the mess that was coming. They kept thinking their influence and contacts could cover any scandal. They were wrong. That weekend I found out the Sterlings had counterattacked. They had hired Hector Lawson, a private investigator with a reputation for digging into the murkiest stuff. It didn't surprise me. They found nothing out of place against me. That night, while dining alone, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Miller," said a masculine voice, deep and cutting. "I have a secret from your past. If you don't stop, everything will be known." I squeezed the cell phone, my heart palpitating with force. "Try it," I answered, without hesitation, although inside anxiety invaded me. "I have nothing to hide." I hung up, but the chill didn't go away. What could they have discovered? Would it be enough to make me fall? Sometimes silence isn't cowardice, but preparation to return the blow. Tell us the stories of revenge that you have lived or witnessed. After so many tense days, I thought I was already ready for any dirty play by the Sterlings. But I was wrong. They didn't come for me. They went for Chrissy. And that was when the fear chilled me to the bone. One night, just when I was about to pour myself a tea, the phone rang. Chrissy's voice was broken and choked. "Mom, I can't take it anymore." The crying on the other end of the line tore me apart. "Brandon says I'm a terrible mother and that you are too. That they are going to take Ethan away from me." I stayed in shock. "Calm down, honey," I tried to sound firm. "Tell me what happened." Chrissy told me Brandon had arrived drunk and in a fury. He threw a file on the table. "Look at this," he shouted. Inside were old papers, the years in which I had to work 2 jobs at the same time and left my daughter in the care of neighbors. "Your mom abandoned you," he shouted with that fake morality of always. "If we go to court, they're going to say she is unstable, and you don't work as a mother either." I squeezed the phone, understanding something. This time they didn't just want to destroy me, they wanted to snatch her son from my daughter. I let myself fall into the chair, feeling my blood freeze. They weren't only defaming, they were threatening to take custody of Ethan away from Chrissy, using my grandson as a tool to crush us. "Mom," sobbed Chrissy, "Brandon said if I don't convince you to stop, he's going to ask for a divorce and fight to keep Ethan. That the judge is going to believe him because I don't have a job or a dime." I heard how my daughter broke down, and for the first time since I started all this, a chill ran through me. "Mom, what if we don't continue?" she whispered, almost without a voice. "I can endure anything except losing Ethan." I hung up with trembling hands, my head a chaos. Because of my fault, Chrissy was in danger. All my years of busting my back, of battling to bring her up, were now used as if they were proof that I was a bad mother. I stayed sitting in the darkness looking at the photo of Chrissy and Ethan on the table, asking myself, did I make a mistake unearthing everything? Is it worth seeking justice if that means my daughter loses her child? That night I didn't sleep a wink. I just stayed hugging the photo, tears running down my cheeks. "Forgive me, daughter," I murmured. "I just wanted to protect you. Please." The next morning, I dialed Attorney Cassidy with my voice broken to pieces by anguish. "Cassidy, I think I screwed up," I let out, unable to hide the terror eating me inside. "They are using Ethan to pressure Chrissy. I can't allow my daughter to lose her son. Cassidy stayed quiet a few seconds and then answered with a tone hard as concrete. Brenda, right now is when you must not waver. If they are grabbing onto the boy, it's because they no longer have any way to sustain themselves legally. Trust me. I'll take care of it. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and hung up with my soul still tight. I wanted to trust Cassidy, but the image of Chrissy crying on the phone wouldn't leave my head. Meanwhile, the Sterlings continued with their onslaught. Eleanor and her sister, Aunt Linda, showed up the next day at Chrissy's house. They sat in the main living room of the mansion, and Eleanor spoke with a voice loaded with fake sadness. "Have you seen what your mother caused, Chrissy?" she said, putting her hand to her chest as if her soul were breaking. "She is ruining Ethan's future and throwing our family's good name overboard. You have to decide. Either you are with us or you allow your mother to sink us all in the mud." Aunt Linda spoke with an icy tone. "You are Ethan's mom. But if you don't manage to put a stop to your mother, we are going to have to take care of the boy as best we can." Chrissy told me later with her voice shattered, "Mom, they made me feel that if I continued with you, I was betraying Ethan." Outside the mansion, the gossip was already running through the upper crust. Nancy Carter, the one who had laughed at me at that party, went from meeting to meeting, murmuring between her teeth. "Brandon's mother-in-law is sick in the head. She even abandoned her daughter when she was a child." Sarah Collins, a distant relative of the Sterlings, joined the bad-mouthing. "Poor Chrissy. She married money, but she got stuck carrying a mother like that." I knew about those comments from a lifelong friend, and every word stuck in me like a razor. It wasn't enough to tear me to pieces. They also wanted to separate Chrissy, make her feel alone, without an exit. I walked from one side to the other in my apartment with my heart crushed. I remembered when Chrissy was little, the times I had to break my back to buy her decent shoes. Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor, was the only person I trusted to watch my girl on the nights I worked a shift. She would tell me, "Brenda, don't you worry," hugging Chrissy. "It's like she's my granddaughter." Chrissy never lacked love, but now they wanted to turn those memories into guilt. I felt like screaming, going to confront the Sterlings, but I knew that would only worsen everything. Late in the afternoon, I went to the park around the corner. I sat on a wooden bench looking for a bit of respite. An older lady passed by. She glanced at me and smiled. "Miss, cheer up with a pretzel? They're warm." "No thanks." I shook my head. But she stopped and locked her gaze on me. "You carrying some pain? Your face looks like you're going to cry." I smiled barely, trying to hide it. "Yes, I'm fine, thanks." But she sat by my side without me asking. "I'm 60 years old," she said with a deep voice, "and I know when a mother is suffering for her child. Don't let yourself be defeated, do you hear me?" Her words were like a spark in the darkness. "Thank you." I bought a pretzel from her, thanked her, and returned home with my soul a little less heavy. That night I dialed Chrissy again, my voice calm but firm. "Honey, I know you're scared," I said, "but I swear I'm not going to let them take Ethan. Be brave for him and for yourself." She stayed quiet, then murmured, "Mom, I'm going to try. But take care." I smiled through tears. "Of course, honey, I promise." I was clear the Sterlings weren't going to stop, but they had already hired Hector Lawson, a private detective with a reputation for digging up the past. But I wasn't worried about what he might discover because I had nothing to hide. What did keep me awake was that they kept hurting Chrissy, and I repeated to myself that I had to move faster and with more precision. This wasn't just for justice, it was to protect my own. I wasn't going to give them the pleasure of winning. That night I couldn't sleep a minute. Brandon's threat tightened my chest. Fear made it difficult even to breathe. They had the nerve to use Ethan to blackmail Chrissy, and just thinking she could lose her son gave me chills. In that small apartment, the yellow light illuminated an old photo of Chrissy with Ethan. Two smiles I hadn't seen for a long time. "Am I going too far?" I whispered in a low voice. "What good is the truth if the price is breaking my family?" As soon as dawn broke, I grabbed the cell phone and dialed Attorney Cassidy, my voice breaking like never before. "Cassidy, I think I messed up. They are using the boy, Ethan, to pressure. I can't allow them to take her son from my daughter." On the other side there was silence. Then I heard her firm voice. "Brenda, this is the moment not to back down. If they already brought the boy into it, it's because they are desperate. Give me 24 hours. I had no idea what she would do, but I clung to that security. "Okay," I murmured. Upon hanging up, I sat without saying anything, hands covering my face, forcing myself to believe, because if not, I was going to collapse. At noon, the phone rang, and Ben Sullivan's voice was heard, excited. "Mrs. Miller, I have it," he said, almost shouting. "A huge scam." I squeezed the phone hard at 1,000. "Tell me, Ben," I urged him. "What did you find?" He took a deep breath and lowered his voice as if fearing someone else would hear. During the last 15 years, a pretty large amount of cash labeled as consulting expenses has regularly left the Sterling Consortium toward a certain Summers Real Estate. That company has no real business. It only owns 3 luxury condos in Manhattan and a house in the Hamptons. I frowned, not fully understanding. "And what's weird about that?" I asked. Ben let out a laugh, one of those that smell of victory. "Summers is Eleanor's maiden name. She has been stealing from her husband under the table for 15 years. And Christopher, with how macho he thinks he is and his overconfidence, hasn't a clue." I froze as if lightning had hit me. Eleanor, the woman who had always looked at me over her shoulder and who in her moment threw a maid's uniform at me, ended up being the one betraying her own husband. "Are you sure, Ben?" I asked with a broken voice. "Positive, Mrs. Miller," he responded. "I have the bank movements, deeds, everything is clear. This is their weak point." I hung up and let myself fall into the chair, feeling a mixture of relief and rage. The Sterlings wanted to sink me with gossip that I was a negligent mother, but they themselves had built their empire on lies. I closed my eyes and murmured, "Thank you, God, for opening my eyes." Cassidy acted without losing time. Instead of sending a legal notification like any lawyer, she put together an anonymous package with copies of the money transfers and the deeds of Summers Real Estate. She sent it by private courier directed specifically to personal for Mr. Christopher Sterling Sr., completely confidential. "No need for us to sign it," Cassidy said when I went to her office to review. "With him reading it, he alone is going to tear his family to pieces." I stayed looking at her, admiring her intelligence without saying a word. "Are you sure he's going to react?" I asked. Cassidy smiled with a spark in her eye. "Brenda, men like Christopher live on honor and control. When he finds out his wife cheated him, he's not going to forgive her." I nodded, but inside doubt kept eating at me. If this plan went wrong, the Sterlings would go against Chrissy again, and I couldn't allow that. That afternoon, Chrissy called me, her voice barely a whisper full of fear. "Mom," almost crying, "I've never seen my father-in-law so furious." An envelope arrived for him, and after reading it, he threw the antique vase that was on the table. He screamed at my mother-in-law. "What filth is this? Eleanor, what the hell is this about Summers?" I heard noises of things breaking and screams in the background. My heart was coming out of my chest. "Calm down, Chrissy," I told her, trying to sound firm. "Mom is doing everything she can to take care of you and Ethan. Stay with him, okay?" She sobbed. "Mom, I'm scared they'll do something to me." "Yes." I squeezed the phone with contained rage. "I swear to you, daughter, no one is going to touch you. Trust me." I hung up and let myself fall into the chair with trembling hands. I was tearing the Sterlings apart from the inside, but I couldn't stop asking myself if I wasn't playing with fire. Later, Chrissy told me the fight in the Sterling house lasted hours. For the first time, the image of the impeccable family came down. Brandon wanted to make peace, but Christopher pushed him away. "You too," he thundered like lightning. "You are the director and you let your mom play you for a fool? Just like that, you are a bunch of useless people." Eleanor, according to Chrissy, didn't open her mouth. She just sat there, white as paper. I imagined her so haughty always, now swallowing her husband's fury. They were so deep in their own disgrace that they forgot to keep attacking Chrissy. The threat over Ethan's custody vanished in the same moment their own world came down. That night I stayed in my apartment looking out the window where the dim light of the street lamp illuminated the peeling walls. I didn't feel like I had won, just a tiredness that soaked me to the bone. I had managed to shake the Sterlings, but what had been the cost? Chrissy was paralyzed with fear and clearly didn't manage to fully comprehend what I was doing. "Just one more step," I repeated to myself in a low voice. "One more step and you're going to be free." But inside I still feared that the truth I was bringing to light would not only destroy that family but also hurt those I loved most. I closed my eyes and prayed, wishing Cassidy was right, that this was the instant to move forward and not turn back. The Sterling house was total chaos, and I knew I had the perfect opportunity to reach out to Chrissy. I couldn't let her stay trapped between fear and that hope barely holding on. That morning, with the first rays of sun entering the window of my little apartment, I took the phone and dialed her. "Chrissy," I spoke to her with a soft but firm tone. "Could you meet me for a moment? It'll just be quick." "At the cafe, the one we used to go to." On the other side of the line, there was a long silence, and then her voice, quiet but clear. "Yes, Mom, I'm coming." I hung up with my heart in suspense between hope and anguish. Would she have the courage to show up, or would she remain immobilized by the fear she had of the Sterlings? An hour later, I was already at the cafe, seated in a secluded corner behind a small cactus, at the same table where we used to have breakfast when she was a girl with braids. And there she appeared, with a cap and dark glasses, as if she didn't want anyone to recognize her. She was pale and with marked dark circles, but upon taking off the glasses, I saw something new in her look, a decided shine, very different from the panic of the previous call. "Mom," she said with a threat of a voice, and sat down, interlacing her fingers on the table. Before I ordered anything, Chrissy took my hand and squeezed it hard, as if fearing I would vanish. "Mom, forgive me," she murmured with eyes full of tears. "Forgive me for not saying anything. I'm not a coward. I just wanted to survive, Mom." Her words pierced me, not with pain, but understanding how much my daughter had suffered. I squeezed her hand, speaking with firmness. "Yes, I know, my girl," I told her, looking her straight in the eye. "You are a mom and you do everything possible to take care of Ethan. I never blamed you." She lowered her gaze and a tear crossed her face. "But Mom," she said quietly, "I left you alone. I should have spoken, done something. But," I shook my head and leaned closer to her. "You are not alone anymore," I responded. "And neither am I. We are going to get out of this together." Chrissy took a deep breath, like gathering all her courage. She opened her bag, took out a black USB drive, and left it in front of me. "I didn't stay silent entirely, Mom," she said with a trembling but firm voice. I looked at the memory stick. My heart was beating with force. "What is this, honey?" I asked, although I already intuited. She raised her gaze with a firmness I had never seen in her since Ethan's birthday party. "I started," she said. "I knew staying quiet wasn't going to protect him forever. I started moving without making noise." She recounted that she used her cell phone to record conversations in the Sterling house. "The times Brandon called me a gold digger," she murmured, with her voice broken. "The times my mother-in-law blurted out that without the Sterlings, you and your mother are worth nothing. I even recorded when he forced me to be on his side, or I would lose custody of Ethan." I froze, unable to process everything. "And how did you manage so they didn't notice?" I asked in shock. Chrissy sketched a small smile, painful and brave. "I learned to move quietly, Mom," she said. "When they shouted at me, I left the phone in my purse with the recorder on. I knew if they discovered it, they would take Ethan instantly." She also recounted that she made copies of bank statements from Brandon's card, expensive business trips he never took her to, extremely fine gifts that weren't for her. "Once," she said in a low voice, "I saw an invoice for a diamond necklace from Paris." I asked him, and he told me it was for his mom. But I know she would never wear something like that. I looked at her, feeling a knot between pride and sadness. "I didn't dare tell you, Mom," said Chrissy while tears rolled down. "I was afraid that if they found out, they would take Ethan in that instant. My plan was to keep it as a last card to use in court if I asked for a divorce. I didn't count on you acting first." I hugged her tight, feeling her chest tremble. "Baby," I told her quietly. "You aren't weak, baby. Today you fought alone in silence. I am so proud of you." Chrissy cried, but now they were tears of relief, as if she had taken tons off her shoulders. For the first time in years, my daughter and I were together for real, without masks or fear. We were no longer two separated souls. We were a united front, stronger than the Sterling name. "Mom," she said while wiping her face, "what are we going to do with this?" She pointed to the USB. I smiled, feeling finally a spark of hope. "We are going to take it where it belongs," I responded. "And we are going to end all this." We left the cafe, but we didn't go home. I took Chrissy's hand and led her straight to Attorney Cassidy Roman's office. The familiar smell of papers and coffee filled the air. Cassidy raised her eyes, her sharp gaze scanning us. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "I suppose this isn't a social visit." Chrissy took a step forward and left the USB on the desk. "This is what I have," she said with a firm voice, "and I want them to pay." Cassidy connected the device to her computer. As we listened to the recordings, Brandon's voice spewing venom, Eleanor humiliating her, she smiled with a lethal coldness. "If the bank statements only shook the ground," she said, "this is going to knock them down completely." I squeezed Chrissy's hand. "Can we really do it, Mom?" she whispered. "Yes, we can," I answered. Upon leaving, I saw the city sky clear up. The road was going to be long, but this time I wasn't walking it alone. 2 days later, I was in front of the mirror in my apartment with a simple gray suit, but formal. It wasn't designer, but I had saved it for moments that matter. Today was one of those days. I pulled back my hair, took a deep breath, and thought of Chrissy, of Ethan, of all the years we endured. The appointment at Attorney Cassidy Roman's office wasn't for courtesy. It was an order, and I knew the Sterlings were already trembling. I looked myself straight in the eyes in the mirror and murmured, "Brenda, the moment has arrived for justice to speak." There wasn't a shred of doubt left, only an icy determination. I went to pick up Chrissy before going to the office. She was there, standing in front of the building gate, dressed formally in a navy blue suit and hair in a high bun. She was no longer the trembling and pale young woman from before. "Mom," she told me upon taking my hand, "I'm ready." I squeezed her features with pride. "Daughter, I am too," I answered her, and we got into the taxi together, heading to Cassidy's office. As the car advanced through the busy streets, my gaze got lost out the window, but my thoughts only revolved around what was about to happen. That wasn't a simple appointment. It was the day the Sterlings would have to look at themselves in the mirror. Upon entering Cassidy's office, that familiar smell of old paper and coffee greeted us. Christopher, Eleanor, Brandon, and their lawyer, Elliot Malloy, were already waiting for us, sitting around the conference table, all with tense faces and looking disheveled. Christopher, the one who used to shout at me with his finger in my face, now lowered his head with hands interlaced to hide the shaking. Eleanor, pale as a candle, didn't want to cross gazes with anyone. Brandon squirmed restlessly, eyes darting around like those of a cornered animal. Attorney Malloy, usually imperturbable, dried sweat from his forehead every so often. Seeing Chrissy and me enter, the four stood up. It was the first time they did that before us. No one said a word, but the silence weighed as if someone had confessed aloud. We settled on the other side of the table without greetings or courtesies. Cassidy straightened up. Her clear and firm voice filled the room. "We are here to negotiate terms that avoid a public trial," she said, directing herself to the Sterlings. "A process that would cause grave damage to the reputation and finances of the Sterling Consortium." Christopher frowned but didn't dare say anything. Cassidy placed 3 folders on the table. Every movement of hers was deliberate and authoritative. "The first folder," she explained, pushing it toward Attorney Malloy, "includes the original documents that prove ownership and the foundational agreements where the right to vote of the founding partner, that is, my client, Brenda, is clearly recognized." The lawyer took the folder, leafed through some sheets, and I noticed how his hand trembled. Cassidy continued sliding the second folder. "Here is proof of embezzlement of funds through the ghost company, Summers Real Estate. Registered in the name of Eleanor Sterling," she said with an icy tone. "We calculate the damages of the last 15 years plus interest in the millions of dollars." Eleanor gave a start with lips pressed tight and face white as paper. Christopher didn't even turn to see her. He just squeezed his hands until his knuckles turned white. "How dare you?" Eleanor managed to say with a broken voice, stripped of arrogance. "And the last folder," said Cassidy with a softer tone, looking at Chrissy, "contains proof of emotional abuse, threats, and coercion by Mr. Brandon Sterling toward his wife. We have recordings." Brandon stood up abruptly. His chair fell with a crash. "What?" he shouted, pointing at Chrissy. "Chrissy, you dared?" All eyes locked on my daughter. But Chrissy didn't shrink. She stood up, looking her husband in the eyes for the first time in a long time. "I dared, Brandon," she released with a trembling but decided voice. "I did it for my son. I am teaching Ethan that his mom will never again let herself be humiliated." Brandon stood frozen with his face flushed, unable to say a single word. Under the table, I squeezed Chrissy's hand, overflowing with pride. Attorney Malloy, upon reviewing the documents, turned white as a sheet. He turned toward Christopher and spoke to him in a low voice, but loud enough for me to hear. "We have no way to win. They have everything." Christopher, that same arrogant man who called me a nobody, now looked 10 years older. He turned to look at me with a hoarse voice. "What do you want, Brenda?" For the first time he called me by my name, not Mrs. nor old woman. Then I spoke calmly, but with words that cut like a blade. "When you asked me, 'Who are you?' At the party, I didn't answer," I said, looking straight at Christopher, then at Eleanor, and finally at Brandon. "Now I'm going to explain it to you." No one dared to breathe. The 6 words I released at the party, "Brandon Sterling is not the owner," were not an outburst. They were a legal mechanism clearly defined in the original contract. It establishes that if the legitimate heir of the founding partner, that is, me, publicly denies title of the current seat in front of a legal representative of the company who is Attorney Malloy, present here, all operations will be frozen for a complete audit. I paused, letting every phrase take effect. "You yourselves turned your party into a trial." The room filled with a silence dense as a storm about to break. Eleanor covered her mouth with eyes wide from fright. Brandon let himself fall into the chair, repeating quietly, "It can't be." Christopher looked at me between furious and defeated. "You planned this from the beginning," he murmured with a broken voice. I said nothing, just smiled barely. Finally, they understood I wasn't a deranged old woman, but someone who knew how to wait, with every step thought out to the millimeter. Cassidy slid the final conditions onto the table, a thin stack of sheets that weighed like a sentence. "This is not negotiable," she said firmly. "This is to be signed." Attorney Malloy reviewed the sheets in a hurry, then sighed and pushed them toward Christopher. "Sign," he indicated in a dry tone, "or we lose everything." Christopher shot me a look loaded with resentment, but he grabbed the pen and signed, every stroke trembling. Eleanor and Brandon also stamped their signatures without protest. I took Chrissy's hand again, feeling her warmth, and I knew we had won. Not for money or influence, but for the truth. Upon leaving the office, Chrissy and I met the radiant sun. "Mom," she told me relieved, "we did it, right?" I hugged her and whispered, "Yes, daughter, we did it, and never again will we bow our heads." I felt relief, but also a mixture of emotions that tightened my chest. Happiness, and the pain of everything lost along the way. Justice was already on the table, and I understood that from that moment, our lives would take another course. Are you a woman who has dared to defend her dignity or that of a loved one? Tell us in the comments the stories of your family. We want to hear them. The signing was a matter of minutes in Attorney Cassidy's small office. The trembling hands of the Sterlings sealed the closure of a long fight. They gave Chrissy full custody of Ethan, along with a trust that would cover his future until 18 years old, and a sufficient amount so she could start a new life on her own. When Cassidy passed her the papers, my daughter's eyes shone, not for the money, but for the sensation of freedom. "Thanks, Mom," murmured Chrissy, while she took my hand under the table. I squeezed it hard, feeling that finally I was taking a weight off me that I had carried for years. A significant part of the Sterling Consortium shares went back to me, thus recovering the place that corresponded to me from the start. I didn't destroy them. I didn't want to resemble them. I only recovered what was mine and prevented them from continuing to use their money and influence to do harm. Before leaving, I told Cassidy with a lump in my throat, "You changed our lives." She smiled and, while adjusting her glasses, answered, "You were the one who held the torch." The day Chrissy and Ethan left the Sterling house, a soft drizzle fell, as if the sky wanted to clean all the past. There were no fights or reproaches. Brandon observed from afar on the porch with a lost look, without the arrogance of before. Eleanor locked herself in her room and didn't show her face. Perhaps because she couldn't bear to recognize that she herself helped her family come down. Only Christopher was in the entrance, with shoulders defeated and face more wrinkled than ever. He saw me and with a rough voice said, "I made a mistake, Brenda." I stayed still, seeing him straight in the eyes, but I said nothing, not out of anger, but because it made no sense anymore. I took Ethan by the hand, led him to the car, and we left, leaving that house behind in the drizzle. We didn't return to my old apartment in the city where so many hard memories lived. With part of the money from the shares, I bought a cottage in a quiet suburb, without luxuries but full of light and with the singing of birds in the morning. In the backyard, there was an apple tree and some bougainvillea full of color. Ethan loved running after our new calico kitten, whom we called Luna. "Grandma, Luna runs really fast," he would shout while jumping into my arms. I squeezed him tight, breathing in the scent of sun from his hair with my heart full of calm. Chrissy used to sit in a wicker rocking chair on the patio to read or draw with a different look, as if she had finally returned to being herself. One afternoon, while we were baking cookies in the kitchen and the smell of vanilla filled everything, Chrissy let out, "Mom, have you forgiven them?" I stopped mixing the dough and looked at her. She looked strong, with her hair loose and calm eyes. I let go of the spoon I had in my hand and thought well about what she had asked me. "I don't forgive what they did," I said slowly. "The insults, the times they hurt you and Ethan. But yes, I forgive myself for having kept silent so long. Forgiveness isn't for them, honey. It's so we can let go of the past." Chrissy nodded with glassy eyes. "I understand," she murmured. "I'm also learning to forgive myself." I marked firm limits with the Sterling family. They could see Ethan, yes, but only under a strict schedule, in a neutral place, and always with Chrissy present. No calls out of place nor gifts without prior notice. All conversation had to pass through the lawyers. Once Brandon sent a handwritten letter asking for forgiveness, but Chrissy barely glanced at it before folding it. "It's not genuine, Mom," she said calmly. "He's only worried about looking bad." I nodded in silence, but inside I felt proud to see her so firm, so clear, so far from the lies that before confused her. Little by little, our lives resumed their course. Chrissy enrolled to study business administration with the hope of setting up a small art supply shop. "I want to achieve something that is mine, Mom," she would say with eyes full of life. "Not for someone else, but for me." I joined a gardening group in the neighborhood where I made friends with other ladies, planting flowers and sharing stories. Ethan went happily to school and arrived with drawings full of color, many with his grandma, his mom, and the cat Luna. "Grandma, stick this on the wall!" he shouted, jumping. I hugged him, smiling, with my heart warm like the sun. Every now and then, through Ben, news of the Sterlings reached me. The company had to restructure, the shares stabilized, but they never returned to their former splendor. Christopher retired. He lives in a small house on the outskirts and is barely seen. They say Eleanor almost doesn't go out, that she fell into depression. Well, Brandon keeps working, but without that air of greatness. Now he's just another manager in the pile. They didn't affect me anymore. They were an old chapter in the book of my life, one I didn't plan to read again. I didn't need the Sterlings to comprehend me, nor to recognize my worth. That worth I had already found in myself, in the love of Chrissy and Ethan, in the days that started with laughter in our modest house. One afternoon, while watering the garden, Ethan ran to hug my legs. "Grandma, you're the best in the world," he shouted with a huge smile. I crouched down, gave him a kiss on the forehead, chest full of joy. "And you are my son," I answered him. The only thing I wanted was for the Sterlings to never dare to despise me again, nor anyone else, and I knew they wouldn't. I stood up, saw the garden full of life illuminated by the light of the sunset, and smiled. Our life, although simple, was ours, and that was everything. Thinking about everything lived, I comprehended a crude but certain truth. Staying quiet before injustice is not an act of nobility. It is allowing others to trample you again. I used to think that with patience and unconditional love I would achieve respect, but it wasn't so. Respect arrives when one plants oneself firmly. I didn't win by seeking revenge. I won because I dared to mark a stop, to say enough when it was time, and because I didn't let my daughter or my grandson grow up believing that being trampled is something normal. The teaching I want to leave is this. You don't need to have money or power or be perfect to defend your dignity. You only need the courage to keep your head high. And when you stand firm, you don't only save yourself, but also those you love most. The story you just heard has modified names and situations to care for the privacy of those who participated. We don't share it to point at anyone, but to launch a real question. How many moms are living this type of thing in silence, inside their own house? If it were you, would you stay quiet to maintain peace, or would you have the courage to face it all to recover your voice and your dignity? If this story touched your heart, leave us your opinion in the comments. Thank you. Dumal. And if you want to keep listening to tales like this, stay on the channel. Who knows, maybe the next story arrives just when you need it most. Thanks for having stayed until this moment of this story. I want to leave you a very clear message. Keeping silence before humiliation is not always kindness. Many times it is ceding power to others so they trample you and also the persons you love most. Thank you. I believed for a long time that enduring was the way to maintain peace, that with sufficient love and patience things would change. But it wasn't so. The more I lowered my head, the more they felt entitled to despise me, and those who suffered most were my daughter and my grandson, obliged to live with fear and shame. What I learned is that dignity doesn't arrive alone. It is built when you dare to put limits and say enough already, even if you don't have money, power, nor a privileged position. I didn't get up for revenge. I got up for justice. So that my daughter understood that being a mother doesn't mean bearing everything, and that being a good person doesn't imply allowing abuse. And now I want to ask you, if you were in my place at that table where they humiliate you in front of everyone and you see your son or daughter paralyzed by fear, would you remain quiet to preserve a false peace, or would you have the courage to break the silence and defend your dignity and that of yours? Really, I want to read your opinion in the comments. And may God bless you, always giving you peace and the necessary strength to keep yourself firm when the moment arrives.